Yeshua, everyone, and you may be seated. And there should be a piece of paper coming around with a song that I'd like you guys to join me in. Some of you guys know this beautiful melody written by Diane Cohen some years ago. And I'd love for us to learn this and start to get connected to it. And it, of course, has to do with my sermon today. So if you get this paper, the Hebrew is on this side with English, and then there's transliteration, if you like, on the back. Everyone got it? Okay. Avinu Shebashamayim, Yitkadash Shemcha, Tavo Malchutecha, Yaseh Notzedcha, Kamo Bashamayim, Ken Ba'aretz, Kamo Bashamayim, Ken Ba'aretz, Et Lachem Kukenu, Ten Lanu Hayom, Usak Lanu Et Chovoteinu, Ka'asher Selachlan, Gam Anachnu L'chayvenu, Ve'al Tivienu B'idei Nisyon, Ve'al Tivienu B'idei Nisyon, Ki Himchatzeinu Hamlacha, Ha'gvora, Ve'atiferet, Le'olmei Olamim, Ve'atiferet, Le'olamim. Amen. Isn't that a beautiful melody? It's really a beautiful melody. And that is the Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. And it's also called other things, the disciples' prayer, the Lord's prayer, Tefilat Avinu. I like Avinu Shebashamayim because it distinguishes it from the Avinu Malkeinu, but it's very much a prayer that's in our space. We're going to continue on the Sermon on the Mount series today. And over the past few messages, and we have something very interesting today, I think. Over the past few messages, we've been exploring Yeshua's teaching in Matthew 6, where he calls us to this secret place, this hidden inner world where the Father sees where no one else can see. Yeshua's been talking about kavanah, that's the inner direction of our heart, and he's been talking about the desire and the heart and the intention behind our righteous actions, giving, prayer, fasting, are beautiful and holy practices in Jewish life, but they can become hollow if they're not done for the right reasons, to serve God rather than to serve ourselves. And the Father who sees in secret is not interested in performance. He's instead interested in integrity and forming our identity in our hidden places in our hearts. So over the last 2 messages in the Sermon on the Mount series, we've been looking at prayer. In the Jewish world, prayer with his disciples was not optional. It was part of Israel's calling as a kingdom of priests, as it is today, standing before God on behalf of the world. And we saw that Jewish prayer grew out of the rhythms of the temple sacrifices, the 3 daily prayers, Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv, mirror the daily offerings in the temple. But Yeshua warns that even prayer can become distorted. Some pray to be seen by others. Others think their many words will somehow influence God to act or force his hand. But Yeshua says that's not how prayer works. Instead, your Father already knows what you need before you ask him. Prayer is not manipulating God. Prayer is trust. And that's why Yeshua now gives us a very special prayer, the Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, and tells us to pray this prayer from the secret place of our heart. That takes us to where we are today. So what I'd like to do is begin sort of a mini-series within the Sermon on the Mount series on this tefillah, on this prayer, because it's so special. And the more I've been digging into this over the past, this has been a few months actually, of looking into this, it's become clear to me how important this prayer is for us Messianic Jews, and something that we, I think, can rediscover in a new way in this season. So what I want to do first today is step back and look at where the Avinu sits within the Sermon on the Mount as a whole. And then, in messages that follow, we'll explore the first century Jewish context of the prayer, talk about how it's understood and used by the Messianic Jewish community in the first few centuries, and then how it connects to our own contemporary Jewish experience today. And then we'll walk through the prayers, like the verse by verse, and kind of open up what this prayer is about. So now I just want to acknowledge that in Messianic Judaism, the Avinu can sometimes feel a little complicated. It's sort of like the image of the cross, because many Jewish people grew up hearing this prayer as something very foreign to Judaism. Usually it's in the King James translation, and is often perceived as a Christian prayer and not a Jewish prayer. But as we go through this series, we're going to discover something quite different. The Avinu is actually a deeply Jewish prayer, a prayer that gathers together the deepest hopes of Israel, and a prayer that I think some other Jewish prayers may even be based off of. So let's jump in. So if we're going to go, I have some slides because this is a little bit hard to follow without slides, and I hope these work and you can follow it. I'm going to break it down in smaller parts so you can see it more clearly. But this is like the whole Sermon on the Mount, okay? Okay, so I want to share this fascinating insight. And the bones of this, the big picture of this, is actually an insight that I picked up from Tim McKay at the Bible Project. And around the same time we started our Sermon on the Mount series here, they started a Sermon on the Mount podcast series there and turned it into videos and whatnot. And so in 2024, I think they came out with this. They finished theirs much quicker than we did. That's all that they do. And anyway, so I'm really intrigued at some of the things that they've been covering. And this, I've never heard anyone talk about it like this. And I think it's huge for us. It's really, really important. So let's see if we can do this. Now, what I'm going to do, it's not only their material, I'm also using my own. This is like a diagram that I created, and then I'm also changed some of the names around and the themes around to reflect our series and what we're doing here. So it's not exactly the same, but the big picture is the same, and I want to give them credit. Okay, so let's go to the second slide here. Okay, so the entire Sermon on the Mount is based and shaped around three sections. So there's an introduction in the green, a main body in the orange, and then a conclusion in the green, okay? Now remember that the Sermon on the Mount is, in the words of Amy Jill Levine, the beginner's guide to the kingdom of heaven. In its largest movement, the introduction identifies who among Israel are truly receiving the kingdom of heaven that Yeshua is announcing. So it's all about identity. Israel's kingdom identity. Who makes up the kingdom of heaven among the people of Israel? That's the whole idea. And again, the Sermon on the Mount is entirely Israel-centric, as it was given in the first century. So let's call this Israel's kingdom identity. Then we have the main body of the sermon that explores what covenant faithfulness actually looks like, what it means to follow the Torah from its deepest intentions. And I want to suggest that that's what the main body of the Sermon on the Mount is about, is how to follow Torah well. Very Jewish. Righteousness here is not outward observance only, but living the heart of the Torah, living the commandments from the inside out, as we've been talking about. And so we'll call this Israel's covenant faithfulness to Torah. And finally, the conclusion brings the sermon to a moment of decision. Yeshua calls his listeners to choose how they will respond to the message about the kingdom of heaven. So we'll call this Israel's call to respond to the kingdom. So this sermon forms a kind of three-part literary pattern. And the identity of the kingdom people appears at the beginning, and the final call to respond to the kingdom of heaven and thus join that identity appears at the end. So we have this identity kingdom thing happening here. And in the center is the question of true covenant faithfulness to Torah. So in literary terms, it's a sort of three-part chiasm, where the outer sections frame and point us towards the central message. In other words, the question of who the kingdom of heaven belongs to frames the most critical message, which is Israel's covenant faithfulness to Torah. Okay? And what's even more fascinating is that this pattern of threes continues inside the sermon. Each of these three major sections unfolds in smaller groupings of three, and those sections often contain their own triads with what's most important right in the middle of the whole sermon. This is brilliantly crafted. You could not do this by accident. Let's go to the next slide. So let's begin by opening up the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. And this will be by way of review, but within the context of the structure. So Yeshua's opening movement unfolds again in three parts. First, we have 9 blessings, which are often called the Beatitude. We've been calling them the Ashrei of Messiah in our series. These blessings announce that the kingdom of heaven is arriving to those least expected, the outsiders, the poor in spirit, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and those who suffer for the sake of peace. We could summarize this section as identity, who is actually receiving the kingdom of heaven. Second, Yeshua calls his Jewish followers to be the salt of the land. In Torah, salt is a symbol of God's enduring covenant with Israel. Salt is placed on the sacrifices in the temple as a sign of covenant faithfulness. So when Yeshua calls his followers the salt of the land, he's reminding them that we must carry and uphold Israel's covenant calling in Torah. It's actually a call back to Torah for his earliest Jewish followers. And we'll call this covenant. Now, third, in this section, Yeshua says his followers are a city set on a hill and a light to the nations. These images echo the prophetic vision in Isaiah, where Jerusalem and Israel are called to reflect God's light and blessing across the whole world, to all of the nations. This points to the larger promises of God in Torah. Abraham's seed to the nations would be blessed. So this is the whole point of what he's trying to get. So let's call this the promises. So when we take this together, we have the introduction of the Sermon on the Mount announces something remarkable, that the kingdom of heaven is arriving through Yeshua, that his Jewish followers are being called to carry Israel's covenant and promises to the world. That's the message. And this is why Yeshua warns us in this section not to lose our saltiness, or we will have no value. If we step away from Torah, we lose our saltiness. Israel's covenant faithfulness is key to her prophetic message in the world. Let's go to the next slide, if you would. Okay, let's move over to the main body of the Sermon on the Mount. Here Yeshua answers critical questions. What does Israel's covenant faithfulness to Torah actually look like? And once again, we see this same three pattern. This section unfolds in three movements. So to the first, we have the right way to remain faithful to Torah. And then second, we have the right way to practice acts of righteousness for God. And third, we have the right way to live in covenant relationships with others. Does that make sense? This is underneath the big part of the main body. We have true Torah, righteous actions, and Torah-based relationships, if you will. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And what we're going to do now is open up the Torah section. And if you can see, the first movement, covenant faithfulness to Torah, and this also has three parts to it. Isn't this neat? It's just amazing. 3 parts to it. So the first movement focuses on covenant faithfulness to Torah. Yeshua begins with a very important statement. Do not think that I have come to abolish the Torah of the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fill them full. Yeshua is not setting Torah aside. He's calling his followers to fill the Torah up and to live out its deepest meaning. He challenges certain interpretations of Torah that had become shallow and corrupt, and then he calls his Jewish followers into a deeper kind of Torah faithfulness. In our series, we've been calling this Torah from the inside out, where the deepest values of Torah shape how we observe and follow specific commandments. This is our first section that we can call true Torah. Okay, then in the middle, Yeshua gives 6 real-life examples showing what deeper faithfulness looked like. Each example highlights a misappropriation of Torah, some commandment in the Torah, which led then to the exact opposite intent that the Torah had in the first place. And instead, these misappropriations oppress those who are actually inheriting the kingdom of God, which Yeshua just talked about. And that's the connecting point here. So he addresses in this section commandments related to anger, reconciliation, adultery, impurity, divorce, vows, truthful speech, revenge, and finally a call to love even our enemies. Now, in each example, Yeshua moves past the surface of the commandment and brings us to deeper values behind it. Again, Torah from the inside out. So we can call this Torah of the heart. And this is fascinating. I don't have a slide for this, but if you look at the 6 examples of Torah, remember murder, adultery, and you break it into these 6, and there's one right in the middle, what's right in the middle of the 3 of this set of 6? It's vows. Vows. Let your yes be yes, and oaths. And we see parallels of this in rabbinic literature about how unjust scales and measures are the seeds of oppression in the world. So truth and integrity, which is required to uphold these larger values of Torah that he's teaching about in the Sermon on the Mount, justice and mercy and faithfulness, and seeing the divine image in others. And these are the core values Yeshua highlights in the Sermon on the Mount. So here, even within his 6 examples, the center of the 6 examples is the most important value that he's getting at to shape his teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. It's brilliant. Okay, then we go to Yeshua's next climax with a very powerful statement: be complete as your Father in heaven is complete. The Greek word teleos is often translated perfect, but again, like we've talked about, it means wholeness, completeness, and maturity. The goal of the Torah faithfulness is formation into mature, whole people who reflect the character of God. So let's call this maturity. Okay, so if we look at these 3 movements, true Torah of the heart, maturity, then we see the same literary pattern. Yeshua's Torah leads to a mature and holy life. That's the message of this section. And right at the center is Torah lived from the heart. And at the center of this, true interpretations of the commandments, is truth and integrity. Truth and integrity, right there in the heart. Okay? I know this is a lot of little pieces, but are you getting the big picture? Okay, let's go to the next slide. And here we have righteous actions, next in the main body. Religious practices that we do as expressions of our love for God. Yeshua teaches that we practice these righteous actions, and our heart must be in the right place when we do. These practices should not be a social tool to gain status, recognition, and honor from others. Instead, Yeshua tells us to do them in secret before our Father who sees what is hidden in secret. Just like the other sections, this part also folds down with 3s and 3s and 3s. But I want to put that on pause because I want to close with that section, because that's the center of the Sermon on the Mount right here. That's like the funnel. So we're going to pause on righteous actions and move over to relationships, and then we'll come back. So the relationship section. Now, the third movement of the main body focuses on godly relationships, Torah-based relationships. And I'm not going to get too much into this because we actually haven't covered this in our series yet. We're right in the middle. But we'll just look at some of the big picture themes. Go to slide, yeah, you're right there. After unpacking what it means to follow the Torah as true and righteous, and how to practice acts of devotion with the right heart, Yeshua turns to righteousness that shapes our relationships with other people. And once again, this opens up into what part? 3 parts. First, we have Yeshua, who addresses our relationship with wealth and possessions, and he teaches, do not store up your treasures on earth, but store up your treasures in heaven. This actually does have to do with relationships, about greed, and our relationship to wealth significantly impacts our relationships to each other. He reminds us not to worry about food or clothing or material needs, because our Heavenly Father knows what we need and provides for his children. Second, we have neighbor, our fellow human beings. He teaches, do not judge, or you will be judged. First, remove the log from your own eye before trying to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. And when we need to ask for wisdom with our relationships, ask and it will be given to you. And thirdly, we have love, the golden rule. So in everything, do unto others what you would have them do to you. Again, these 3 form a literary unit. Righteous, Torah-based relationships require that we first deal with greed, then judgment, pride, and criticism. and then we do unto others what we would have them do unto us. That's how we do unto others as we would do unto us. And at the center of this is dealing with our pride. Being faithful to Torah requires that we first apply it to ourselves. It boils down to Yeshua's core message. Okay, let's go to number 8. And this is really cool. The commandment at the end of the main body mirrors the one at the beginning of the body. And there's tons of other structures here that we don't have time to get into, but it's really cool. So if you look at the section that begins with Yeshua saying that he came to fulfill the Torah and the prophets, and then here at the end he shows what that fulfillment looks like in everyday life. Love your neighbor. So the big message here is Israel's covenant faithfulness to Torah ultimately finds its expression in love. If you can see this from the whole structure itself of the Sermon on the Mount. All right, let's go to, next slide, we're going to go to the conclusion section. So to close the Sermon on the Mount, Yeshua brings his listeners to a moment of decision, and he asks us to choose, how are we going to live our lives? And throughout the sermon, Yeshua has been revealing the way of the kingdom of heaven, and now he brings us, all of us who are hearing, to a moment of crisis where we must face the most important questions of all. Will we follow Yeshua's Torah or not? Once again, this final section unfolds in 3 parts. We have 2 gates. First, Yeshua describes 2 gates along a path. One gate is wide, the other leads to destruction. And the other gate is narrow. One gate is wide and leads to destruction. The other is narrow and leads to life. And Yeshua urges his listeners to enter the narrow gate that leads to life. Which path will we choose? Then we have a second analogy, 2 trees. Yeshua speaks about 2 different trees. One produces good fruit, one produces rotten fruit. The tree that produces rotten fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. The question becomes, what kind of fruit will our lives produce? And then we have 2 houses. Finally, Yeshua tells this story. One house is built on a solid foundation. When the storm comes, the house stands. The other house is built on sand. When the storm comes, it collapses. The difference between the 2 is simple. One person hears Yeshua's Torah and puts it into practice. The other hears but does not live it out. The final question in the Sermon on the Mount is, will we build our lives on Yeshua's Torah or not? Let's go to slide 10. And let's summarize here before we get to our climax. So the Sermon on the Mount, again, unfolds in 3 major sections. At the beginning, we see the surprising identity of those who are receiving the kingdom of heaven. They're not the people we might expect. Instead, they're the ones that the world often overlooks. Then, these people carry Israel's covenant calling. They are symbolized as salt in the land and are called to reflect God's light and promises in the prophets to the nations. At the end of the sermon, Yeshua brings us back to those who receive the kingdom of heaven, those who will make a decision to respond to Yeshua's Torah. Do you see how they bookend each other? And they mirror each other. And then they either enter the narrow gate, they produce good fruit, will they build their lives on his words? And these frame the main body where Yeshua answers the most critical question: what does Israel's covenant faithfulness actually look like? What do we actually need to do? And this section, again, unfolds in 3 movements. We have the right way to remain faithful to Torah, the right way to practice acts of righteousness, and the right way to live in covenant relationship with others. And what's at the center? Remember, we're getting down, closing into the climax. What's at the center? The right way to practice our righteous actions of devotion. So let's build this out. We haven't done this one next. You can go to the next slide. And okay, once again, here, righteous action unfolds in 3 parts. First, Yeshua speaks about a true reward that comes from the Father in heaven. If we perform our righteous acts to be seen by others, human recognition becomes our reward. But if we do them for God alone, then our reward comes from our Father who sees in secret. This is very important to Yeshua. Second, we have devotion. Yeshua gives 3 examples of Jewish devotion: giving, prayer, and fasting. And these are acts of service to God, but Yeshua warns that even these holy practices can become distorted if we perform them for public recognition. Instead, they're meant to be done before God alone, guarding our hearts from temptation of praise and status. 3, we go to true wealth. Yeshua speaks about treasure. Do not store up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. In other words, the real reward is not earthly recognition or a material gain. The true treasure is life in the kingdom of heaven itself. So the reward connects to treasure in heaven in our triad. Does that make sense? Reward, true wealth, which is treasure in heaven. They bookend each other. And what's in the middle? Our devotion, right in the middle. Let's go to the next slide. And if we open up devotion, what do we find? 3 practices. I mean, you couldn't do this by accident. 3 practices: giving, prayer, and fasting. And what sits at the center of those 3? Prayer. And remarkably, at the very center of Yeshua's teaching on prayer is one specific prayer, the Avinu. See this? It's amazing. And this means that we've arrived at the epicenter of the Sermon on the Mount, the Avinu Shebashamayim. And now, if we go to the next slide, we'll take this even further. The Avinu itself is also structured around 3 movements. The first movement is about God's kingdom, which actually has 3 petitions about God. Sanctify your name, your kingdom come, and your will be done. And then the last part also has 3 movements within it. Forgive us, all about deliverance. Forgive us, lead us not into trial, and deliver us from evil. And what's at the center, the very center of the Avinu? Give us today our daily bread. Our challah, our bread. I mean, the center of the center of the center of the Sermon on the Mount. If you go to the next slide, Ralph. At the heart of Yeshua's manifesto about Israel's covenant faithfulness with God, about the kingdom of heaven, it's not a command to achieve something great. It's a simple prayer of dependence. Father, give us the bread that we need today. Now, this connects right back to the wilderness when we learned to trust God one day at a time. Every morning we gathered manna, their portion for bread. In the Hebrew, for portion is actually similar to this phrase that we have here. The portion of bread connects right back to the wilderness experience. And our sages reflected on this. One midrash says, the manna fell each day so that Israel would turn their hearts to their Father in heaven every day. You see the connection? At the heart of kingdom life is not about achievement. It's not about performance. It's not about a display of piety. It's a daily dependence on our Father. And then later Yeshua says, I am the bread of life. And now we understand. I am the bread of life. So we'll pause there. This gives us the big picture. The Avinu Shebashamayim is a very special prayer. As we're going to see in our next message, it's deeply Jewish and resonates with Jewish prayer today. And I believe that this is a prayer that we Messianic Jews can rediscover. And then we'll explore this together over the next few messages. So, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. All right. Of the house of Israel, and may your descendants and the descendants of your people Israel be those who know your name and study your Torah. For Messiah's sake, for Messiah's sake, for Messiah.